Well, good morning, everyone. I want to start out with a question. It's the $64,000 question. What's the secret to negotiating success? Let me say this, it's more than learning just rules and techniques. It's developing a certain attitude, which we're going to try to attempt to define today. And that's the real key to success at the negotiating table. And yet, this is not an easy task, just for one thing, because the stakes are so high. What is at stake when people negotiate? There's a lot more than people often assume. Everyone thinks of bottom line dollars, but a big negotiation can literally make or break someone's career. It's where relationships are built or where they get torn apart. And it's also something more and more people are being called on to do. Last year, when we were profiled on the PBS show In America, this is how they characterized it.
Some people love it, others dread it. But if you're in business, you can't avoid it. Negotiating. Long thought of as just haggling for the lowest price, today's negotiator has to be more nimble and approach each situation with a new mindset in order to achieve long-term success.
In today's world, deals are likely to be more complex than they were in the past. There are still commodity-type, transactional buying and selling going on, but more likely, they're complicated deals that involve joint development or joint innovation that neither side could do on their own. And these negotiating situations are different, and they take a different approach. People have to use the strategies and the tactics that are appropriate to the total situation.
Once designated to a niche group of professionals within a company, today almost anyone in a firm negotiates frequently. So more people need this training than ever before.
Yeah, I've been writing, researching, and lecturing on this subject for the past 30 years. And I want to share with you what's new in the field of negotiating. First, we're going to take a look at the conventional approach to negotiation with a scenario that may sound familiar. And then we're going to see what the new research that's been conducted in the field has to say about how negotiating has changed and the new approaches that are needed today to negotiate successfully in the current world of business. All right, now here's our first question. Does the attitude that you have going into a negotiation have anything to do with the outcome you get? Which leads to this poll question. How easy or hard do you find negotiating?
So this will be our first poll, folks. So once again, to reinforce what Frank just said, the question is, how difficult is negotiating as an activity? So when I launch the poll, you're going to have an opportunity to answer between 1 as easy or 10 as hard. So I'm going to launch our first poll now, and we'll let you guys vote. We'd love to get about 80% participation, so you can what your answer is. Good, we got about 22% having voted. 40, 44, 56, that's good. Many of you as can vote, it would be wonderful. About 74%, we'd love to get a little more than that before we end the voting. That's 81. Good, we're doing great. We'll give you a second more. And all right, so we'll end the voting there, and we're going to share the results now. So here's what we show, Frank, that 3% of the people rated themselves as a 2. It looks like the largest number, 32% of the people showed themselves as rating it a 7.
Most people don't find negotiating their easiest assignment, and I can relate to that. Let me set up this scenario. I'm the account manager for a consulting company. I'm working with a potential client who's asked me to give them a quote for an upcoming project where they want me to supply them 4 program managers to work full-time on a year-long project. I quote a rate of $225 an hour, which is our normal rate. Now, I'll be calling on the buyer a little later today, but first, I'm going to huddle with my boss. Her name is Lexi. She comes now.
Okay, Frank. Now, this is a great opportunity for us, and we've been slow. Numbers are down a little bit now, so we really need the business.
Yeah, but listen, I'm sure they're going to try to get our rate down. What's our bottom line on this?
Frank, 2.25 is a fair price, so you have to try to get it for that. You remember what we talked about at our sales meeting, Frank? If you aim high, you're going to do better. So the main thing is you've got to justify that rate and focus on how you're going to do that.
Right. Okay, I'll tell them about our experience in these kinds of projects. Let's see. that more than just providing program managers, we can offer them consulting advice, that we're financially strong.
Frank, I wrote the pitch. I don't need you to do it again. Okay, it's great. You got your value proposition down. Now, as I said, we really need the business. So if you have to, which you probably won't, but just in case, you can cut your rate to $215.
Gee, that's it. I think they're looking for us to be a little more aggressive with our price.
Oh, Frank, man up for God's sake. You should have no trouble getting the business at that price. Now, I have to have a mani-pedi. I'll see you.
All right. Yeah, no problemo. Look, I'm sure I'll get our price. Okay, here goes. Now I'm fully prepared to go into the negotiation with my potential client and get together with their buyer. Let's see. Oh, there he is now. Gee, hi, Big Louie. I see you got my proposal. Well, I hope it looks good because, so I really need the business. I'm up against my quota since we're closing out our quarter. Now, you notice I worked out a great price at $225 for each of my program managers. Now, that's practically a bargain. Are you ready to sign that contract?
$225 a bargain? What, you pulling my chain? Look, I talked to 15 other consultants. They all come in lower than that.
Yeah, but look at our people's credentials. What, they...
Oh, come on, knock it off. Frankie, don't waste your breath. One program manager, they like another. Now, look, you got to sharpen your pencil, okay? I'm deciding on this thing quick. In fact, 2 of your competitors are sitting in my lobby right now, so you better tell me quick, Frankie. I mean, what can you do for me?
Oh, okay, how about this? Supposing it came down to $220. No. Let's make it $215 an hour. How does that grab you?
$215? Come on, that don't grab me at all. Look, I told you, I'm talking to these other guys. They're all lower. In fact, we're thinking of outsourcing this thing to India where we can, get great talent for $180 an hour. That's where I want you to come in, Frankie.
180. I can't get near that price.
Oh, come on, Frankie. You're making me sad here. Look, because I like you so much, I'm going to pay you a premium. I tell you what, for you, $205.
Gee, I wish I could. I can't go that low.
All right, well, let's face facts, Frankie. We ain't going to make a deal. I tried to do you a solid. I give you $205, but you can't do it. You can't do it. So maybe next time. Hey, Adele, send in the next guys. I'm sure they want to play ball. Enjoy the rest of your day, Frankie. See ya. Come on, Becky. You're breaking my heart here. Sit down.
What?
Hold your horses a minute. I tell you what, Frankie, because I like you so much and because we're very close here, here's what I'm going to do for you. I'm going to split the difference with you, Frankie. I'm going to make it $210.
Oh, man, I can't do $210 either.
Would you listen to this guy, Adele? He's busting my chops here. Come on, what's the matter with you? I'm doing you a solid here. You're at $215. I'm at $210. Come on. What? Don't put the squeeze on me, Frankie. Come on. What's the lousy $5?
Yeah. Only $5. Okay. Done deal. Let's draw up the contract.
Okay. I draw up the contract.
Okay, folks. How did I do? Now, I know I told my boss that I could get the $215 or even better, and I took a little less, but I had to. I would have never gotten the deal. Now, considering that Big Louie was looking to pay $180, I think I hung in there pretty good in pulling him up to $210. You know what? If I say so myself, I think I did a pretty darn good job negotiating. He's probably feeling lucky he got it for $210.
Hey, I thought that $225 was a pretty good deal, and I was prepared to pay that. So I was just doing my job to see if there was any, play in that price. Actually, if I got a few bucks off, I'd have been happy. But it came down so much, so fast. I'm like, I'm wondering, hey, how much more is he willing to concede?
Oh, gee. So maybe I didn't do such a great job negotiating that deal. Maybe I even left a little bit of money on the table. Let me ask something. Do you ever leave money on the table? Now, this brings us to our second poll. How would you rate yourself as a negotiator?
All right, folks. So here we go. We're now at our second poll. And the question is, how do you rate yourself as a negotiator? 1 being you need a lot of help, and 10 being you're the best in class. So I'm going to launch our poll now, and go ahead and rate yourself from 1 to 10. Hopeless to best in class. That's great. 60%. 70, 77, good. Take a little longer, that's at 80. I think the rest of you are on the phone. Oh, 87, good, we're getting a little more. All right, so I'm going to end the voting now. Thank you for voting. And it looks like the highest number, Frank, is 6. So 22% of the people think that they're rating themselves about a 6.
Well, yeah, let's see. There's not a lot of best in class. In fact, I would say 0 is a pretty low number for best in class. Now, how come? See, this is where the conventional approach to negotiating training generally kicks in. Now, we used our not ready for prime time players here to create just a slightly over-dramatized recreation of a negotiating scenario that's not too far off from what I've not only seen, but lived through many, many times. Now, this is kind of a caveman approach or a mafioso approach to negotiation. Now, in the traditional way of giving advice on how to improve your performance as a negotiator, you critique the mistakes people make and offer advice on what to do and what they should have done instead. And that's fine. It's a good starting point. In this little scenario, we made the mistakes really obvious, and yet in real life situations, even experienced negotiators fall into these traps. What are they? First of all, did I make some inopportune remarks, revealing information that undermine my position? Gee, I really need the business. I'm up against my quota because we're closing out our quarter. Now, you might be thinking, well, no negotiator worth their salt would say something as stupid as that. And I'd say, guess again. I've been out on many calls with salespeople and heard things like, we have a surplus of product right now, or our stock price is down, we really need the business. Now, how about on the other side of the table, purchasing people? They ever say anything like, your product is the only one that passed the acceptance test? Our engineering people really love your design. Or how soon can you get your product in here? We're about to shut down the line. And by the way, is your price negotiable? Yeah, well, not anymore it isn't. So what's the advice? You know, there's an old saying in wartime that loose lips sink ships. The application here is loose lips sink negotiations. Or to be more blunt about it, the first rule of negotiating is just shut up. Be careful about the information you reveal, especially in the opening of the negotiation. Now, were there any other glaring mistakes I made? If you recall, we did have this price gap where I started out at $225, he countered at $180. To make the deal happen, concessions were going to have to be offered. So I made the first move and brought my price down. Here's the question. Does it matter who concedes first? In the experiments that we've done, we found this to be the case, that in the vast majority of situations, the one who conceded first ended up getting a below average settlement. So be careful about making the first move in the negotiation. And there's another point. When I did come down in my negotiation, the negotiation I had with Luick, how much did I concede? Now I went not only right to my bottom line with my first concession, eventually I blew past that, and now I got to go back and explain to my boss why I took so much less. And the worst thing is how Louis the buyer felt at the end of the deal. He got pricing bottom line, but because I came down so much so fast, he was left feeling he could have done even better. So again, be careful how far you move in one jump. Now, there's one other issue. I made a final concession to close the deal at the end when I split the difference between his $205 offer and my supposedly bottom line price of $215. Now, what did he say, by the way, to convince me to make that concession?
Come on, Frankie, what's a lousy $5?
And I'm thinking, yeah, if it's only $5, why not? The question is, what will that $5 cost me for 4 full-time people over the course of a year? And here we come to our next poll.
All right, so we're now at our third poll, folks, and this one's going to be a little bit different because we're going to time this one very quickly. So get your clickers ready to answer the question. So the question is this: you have 4 program managers, full-time program managers for a year at $225 an hour. So the question is this: is that $5 an hour concession that Frank made actually worth? So we're going to launch the poll now, and I'm going to give you 15 seconds to answer. You can say 8,000, 10,000, 12,000, 25, 40, or 60. Keep voting, and 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And I'm stopping voting. And now let's take a look at these results, folks. We're going to leave them up there for a little bit. With 76% of you participating, we had 13% said $10,000, 3% said $12,000, 6% said $25,000, 56% of you said $40,000, and none of you said $60,000. So, what's the correct answer? We'll go back to our display here to actually go through that. So let's do the math. Stay on me for a second here, Nathan, if you don't mind, speaking to my wonderful cameraman here. So if you have 40 hours a week, let's say 50 weeks because you get a couple of weeks vacation. 40 hours a week for 50 weeks is $2,000, 2,000 hours. 2,000 hours at $5 an hour is $10,000, and $10,000 times 4 workers is $40,000. So congratulations to those of you that selected that. We got some smart negotiators here, Frank. So about 56% got the right answer. Right?
That I think is the best results I've ever seen. Usually they're all over the map. In any case, what's the advice? Whenever you're negotiating over any unit, whether it's rate per work hour, like we have here, or price per square foot, price per pound, price per piece, or just dealing with percentage discounts, it's very easy to lose sight of the real dollar amount in the heat of the negotiation. So there's almost a negotiating commandment, which is never make a concession without calculating ahead of time what the concession is really worth. Because in the middle of the negotiation, it's very hard to think these things through. So what have we said so far? There's 4 quick tips, and you can think of them almost as rules of negotiating. Number 1, be careful about the information you reveal, especially in the early stages of negotiation. Second, only concede first if you have to. Try to get the other person to make the first concession. 3, when you do concede, whether or not they've already offered you a concession, make sure your first concession is not too big a move. Otherwise, you're going to undermine the credibility of your opening position and leave the other person feeling that they could have done even better. And watch out for what we call number scrambling. Now, let me just say this. There's a lot more to negotiating than 4 simple tips. But the traditional approach to teaching this subject is to say, here's the rules of negotiating. And if you use these things, you're going to do great. But it leaves out something important, the attitude that most people take into the negotiation. And the question is, how do most people approach negotiating? And we'll take a poll on this.
Yeah, so this is our 4th poll, folks. So this is saying basically, how do you approach a major negotiation? So I'm going to launch the poll now, but I'll read through your possible answers here. So, do you relish the challenge of facing up to differences with others? Do you know that you have to negotiate but do it reluctantly? Do you see it as one of those last resort things? If you can avoid it, you avoid it. Or truth be told, you would rather have a root canal. So you can go ahead and rate your answer now. And we got about 37% participating, 50, 59, 75. Let's give it a little longer, a few more votes. We're up to 81%. I think that's about the max we're going to. There's 84. I think we had 87. If anybody wants another second to think about it. All right. So we're going to end voting now with a 84% participation. So here's our results. So 31% of the people said they relish the challenge of facing up to the differences that they have with others. 50% of the people said they know that they have to do it, but they do it reluctantly. 6% say they see it as one of those last resort things. If you can avoid negotiating, you avoid it. And nobody gave my answer, Frank, that they'd rather have a root canal. I'd rather have a root canal. I love root canals. All right.
So we have a decided minority who actually look forward to it. And I think that's one of the reasons why people find it so hard to follow many of the rules of negotiating. And let me give one example. Several years ago when I was living in New York City, I had a homestand, a public seminar on negotiating that I was conducting in Midtown Manhattan. Now, there was a small group from the same company who came to the program, one of whom was a young lady named Eva, a graphic designer, who had just moved into a business position where she would now be making the deals for the printers of these that she and her department were designing. So after the program, she comes up to me gushing about how the program had opened her eyes to all kinds of opportunities to negotiate that had really never occurred to her before. A few weeks later, her company calls me in and asks if I could stop by and see how their people were doing applying these new skills that they'd learned. So when I dropped by Eva's office, she brightened right up to show me her negotiating success, pointing to this new pair of shoes. I got $35 off, she proudly tells me. Oh, that's great, I say. Now, how about on the business front? Well, she tells me, I'm having this mini brochure printed tomorrow. It's a pretty small piece for us, but I want it to go well, so I'm using my favorite printer, Howie. So I say, okay, well, great. What does a job like this cost? And she said, oh, I got a really good price, $3,200. I say, well, good for you. Now I'm curious, where did he start from? How much did you get him down? Well, no, that was the price he gave me. I say, well, did you get other bids? No. Then how do you know the price is so good? Well, he told me it was a good price. Now I'm looking a little skeptical, so she adds, look, I've always been really fair to him, and I'm sure he'll be fair with me. I said, yeah, but on the other hand, just for fun, you might want to get a couple other bids and see where they come in. So right while I'm sitting there, she calls this other printer she knew. She describes the job, and I see this kind of troubled look on her face. She hangs up and says, $2,600. I said, well, look, maybe the guy lowballed you. Do you know another printer you can call for a quote? Sure. She calls the second guy, $2,550. So I said, I think you got to negotiate with good old Howie. What do I say to him? Well, look, you got to decide that. Oh, okay, here's one thing you can tell him. You can just say the simplest thing. You check the market out. He's about 29. See what he says. And so she says, well, what if he says no? He does really good work, and I want to use him on this job. So I said, look, then ask him if he'll split it with you and come down 10%. What if he says no to that? Look, just tell him, and if he says no to all that you need him to take $100 off, and then you can give him the order. I guarantee you'll get that one. In fact, tell you what, if he doesn't give you the $100, I'll take $100 out of my own wallet, and I'll give you $100. And then I say, listen, I got to run. Here's my cell number. Give me a call after you talk to him and let me know what happened. A couple hours later, my phone rings. There she is. Well, I talked to Howie, and as soon as I mentioned I got these lower prices, he gave me the 20%. So I say to myself, great. Lesson learned for a lifetime. Well, it didn't quite last a lifetime. About 6 months later, my wife and I are having an evening out at Lincoln Center, and we're starting with dinner across the street at this Italian restaurant, Fiorello's. So we run into this lady, Eva. Now she's excited now to show me her company's annual report, this splashy 4-color piece, looks really high end. So of course I'm interested in the business end of things. And I said, how much does the printing cost for this? Well, about $45,000. Say, Howie? Yep. So how did the negotiation go? Where do you start negotiating from? How much you get them down? He says, oh, no, I just took the price he gave me. I said, what? You didn't try to bargain with the guy? How come? And she says, because you didn't make me. Now, here's where we have to part company with the conventional approach to negotiating training, which is here's the rules, follow them, and you'll do great. But that leaves something important out. We are not operating like Mr. Spock, making completely rational decisions. We're human beings, and we're not always so rational because emotions enter into the fray. And this is, we want to offer a new approach to improving people's negotiating skills. It started with us looking at some new research into human motivation that shows how the way people make decisions is a lot different from what we assumed in the past. Now, there's a very large literature among business leaders and academics, and I'm going to refer to a small piece of it, to three of these thinkers here. Daniel Kahneman wrote the book called Thinking, Fast and Slow, which is based on the work that he was awarded the Nobel Prize for. Bill Anton, who wrote the books on the wings, Business Success Through Self-Knowledge and Ascend, is a consultant to top CEOs. And the third is the CEO of one of the most successful companies in the country, Charles Koch, who wrote a book called Good Profit. Now, I'm going to start with Kahneman and Anton, whose work directly complements each other. Kahneman himself is an interesting figure. He won a Nobel Prize for economics. He's been rated the 7th most influential economist in the world. And what's interesting about all that is that not only does he not teach economics, he claims to have never taken a university level course in economics. He's a psychologist, and that's the point. You can't understand why people make economic decisions, such as the choices they make when they negotiate, without understanding a lot more about what makes people tick. Now, the title of his book, Thinking, Fast and Slow, refers to our two mental systems. One is our automatic or fast system, and the other is our reflective system, which is slow and deliberate. All right, here's an example. If you ask me the temperature because you want to know how warmly or not to dress today, and I say 20 degrees, immediately you'd figure, wow, it's really cold. I'm going to have to bundle up. But if I said 20 degrees Celsius, unless you're a European, you probably have to pause and reflect on it for a second or two. And then you say, well, oh, shirt sleeve weather, that's almost 70 Fahrenheit. Now, his point is that it's not enough to learn new ideas. In order for them to become practical, usable, they have to become ingrained, almost second nature. In other words, part of our automatic system. Now, this was an idea that was then picked up by Bill Anton and developed. He talks about what he calls mental models, which often make it difficult to apply what we learn. Mental models are the way we look at the world and the way we regard ourselves. And the challenge is that they often get in the way of using new ideas. Relating it to our subject, what makes it difficult to apply the rules of negotiating are the emotions that the process of negotiation itself dredges up. Namely, how when we're under stress, we lose our perspective and find it very difficult to use the techniques that we've learned. I had this conversation with my colleague, Bill Sanders, and he related it to one of his passions, which is golf. Bill is a tremendous golfer. He can drive the ball and hit long shots off the fairway, but his short game is really phenomenal. And he's practically a scratch golfer, so he's shooting right around par. So he used to play with his buddy of his, who was an All-American collegiate player. And Bill said that he could match him shot for shot. But when they played in a tournament, like they have a little two-man tournament for a small person, mostly for pride, Bill said, I almost could never beat the guy. He said, in every area of the game, I was comparable. But the difference was that when this guy needed to hit a big shot to win the back nine or something like that, he could do it almost every time. Now, he had the mechanics of golf down, but he said, I had the mechanics of golf down. I knew all the rules of the road. But it took a lot more than that to play the way he did. The only way to say it, and this is the way he put it to me, was he was a golfer. He had a mental model that said, this is who I am. I know how to hit winning shots when I have to. And this is the missing link to improving people's negotiating performance. More than just knowing the rules, you have to think of yourself as a negotiator. And again, this is the ideas of Bill Anton come into play, because for most of us, our mental models are not aligned with what it takes to negotiate successfully. One of the first steps to creating that alignment is, again, the attitude, the approach you take towards the activity itself. Several years ago, I started saying that to be a successful negotiator, you have to lean into the negotiation. And I came up with that phrase by observing negotiations where you see people who are reluctant and worried actually leaning back in their seats, while the select few who actually like it are leaning forward. Then I heard an even better term a couple of years ago when I was watching the World Cup matches. One of these British announcers kept referring to the team on the attack as playing on their front foot. And I thought, yeah, that's a good way to put it. This is what really good negotiators do. They are on their front foot. The problem is that too often we find ourselves not on our front foot, but because of the emotions of the moment, we're kind of on our back foot. One of the best negotiators I ever worked with was a man named Mel Klayman. And when it got into the crunch time of the negotiation, you could almost feel the nervous all around. Mel would literally lean forward. He almost had a half smile on his face, and you could just sense his sentiment. I'm in my element here. It was a kind of a quiet confidence. He knew what to do, and he made phenomenal deals because he was a negotiator. Being on your front foot is a major element in being a negotiator, but it's not the whole story. Here's another component on the road to, again, being a negotiator. And this fell out of a conversation I had with the head of supply chain of one of the largest procurement organizations in the country. And the way he put it to me was, he said, look, I've always recruited people who were seasoned and had reputation being tough negotiators and given the Briggs-Myers test and all that kind of stuff to make sure that this is something they were really skilled at and they were assertive and all the rest of it. And he said, but here's the problem. One of my people will come back from negotiating with a supplier or contractor and tell me, I got a really good deal. I knocked their price down 15%. And he said, my immediate reaction is, wow, 15%, that's really something. You got a great deal, congratulations. Then he says, I'd start reviewing the contract and I noticed something. Wait a minute, we didn't get any terms on this thing. No help installation, no training whatsoever. What's So the way he put it and concluded it was that it's a great price, but a lousy deal. Now let me ask you, have any of you gotten a really good price, but a not so hot deal? And you say, what went wrong? Well, let's look at the situation I described. Had these supply chain folks been on their front foot? Sure. But again, there's more to being a negotiator than just that. You have to see the negotiation itself in broader terms. Namely, that all negotiations are not the same. There's a continuum of activities that make up the overall negotiating process. It starts by asking this question: why do people negotiate in the first place?
And that brings us to our is asking that question: why do business people negotiate at all? So I'm going to launch the poll now. I'll read off the answers. You'll have plenty of time to answer. So you need, or your organization needs, what the other party has to offer. You enjoy the opportunity of finding others at the same time, or you're often bored and lonely, and negotiating is a way to meet new people. All right, so take your time and select your answer. Got about a 35% participation rate, 61%. Continuing, got some bored people, it looks like. 70% participation rate. We'd love to get you back up into the 80s, so take your time and think about your answer. I think the police are coming for Frank and I in the background. All right, we got about a 74%, and I'm going to give it just another couple of seconds if anybody else wants to vote. All right, and we're going to end the voting now at an 80%, and so here's the results, Frank. It looks like we have 51% of the people are, they need what the other party has to offer. 32% enjoy the opportunity of finding a satisfying deal for themselves and others at the same time. And 3% are bored and lonely and think negotiate. All right.
All right, well, our little joke aside, most of us go into a negotiation because we have, obviously, we have needs to satisfy, not because we're sad and lonely and have no one else to talk to. But the pressure to satisfy our needs narrows our focus. It creates a kind of tunnel vision effect. I was asked about this last year when I was interviewed by PBS, and here's a very short clip of that interview.
All right, we're going to cut off the mic and the camera to show you.
Every negotiation involves conflict, and it can't be wished away. In fact, it's what makes it a negotiation in the first place. The fact that you want one thing and I want something else. You'd like to get the price up here, I want to get it down here, or whatever the issue of contention is. The problem is that for many people, that's as far as negotiating goes. Now, how do you get beyond that? To really negotiate creatively, you have to broaden your horizon in terms of what negotiating actually is. And it's not a single activity. In fact, it's a continuum of activities that make up the overall process. It begins with simple bargaining, moves into creative deal making, and at the far end of the continuum is strategic relationship building. To get into adding value to the deal, you have to get beyond the simple bargaining focus, which is what do I want to get out of this deal for myself, to the creative question, which is what do you need to get out of the deal that you may not have even thought of yourself, and how can I meet your needs in a way that will open up new opportunities for us both.
Video, and we are back, and let's go back here to our presentation.
Yeah, well, let me talk a little bit more about this continuum. Again, it starts with bargaining, moves into creative deal making, and then at the far end is relationship building. The bargaining mode is where most negotiations begin, and the burning question in bargaining is how much flexibility does the other person have in this transaction, and how much of that flexibility, their flexibility, can I get for myself? And this is really what Big Louie was trying to find out with me, was Frank's bottom line. And this is a part of the negotiation, pardon me, that's focused on price haggling, and it's competitive because what he gains comes at my expense, and when my gain is going to come at his loss. So that's the bargaining part of it. How about deal making? Deal making is concerned with how do I add value by broadening the issues and finding where we have mutual gain trade-offs. Then relationship building looks beyond just this deal alone to how can we work together over time, and where our focus shifts from how can I get more out of them to how can I be a resource for them, and how can they help me out at the same time. Now, in that context, the mistake made by these procurement guys who wound up with great price but lousy deals is pretty obvious. Their mental model of negotiating was the same one that a lot of people have, which is that it begins and ends with bargaining. Now, they had, again, a limited view of the overall negotiating process. What they really needed to do was to move across the continuum and figure out how to broaden the deal by addressing these other issues. And that's an important element in being a negotiator, looking at the deal more like an entrepreneur. And I want to pick up on that because this is one of the things that Charles Koch cites as one of the keys to his company's success. Namely, they promote an entrepreneurial culture inside this very large organization. Now, I worked with many large companies, and they tend to get moved down by a bureaucratic model or mindset. So it takes a really big effort by those at the top to get people looking at it differently. He calls their system market-based management. What does that mean? And what does it take to be an entrepreneurial negotiator? Well, let's take the country's wealthiest entrepreneur. After all this time, it's still Bill Gates. And we're going to see what Mr. Gates has to say about himself as a negotiator. Here goes. I'm the world's greatest negotiator. You bet I'll get on to pay for that. Wait. My slides got mixed up. That's Donald Trump. All right, here's the actual quote from Bill Gates, who said, I am not a negotiator. I hate negotiation. What the heck? I mean, how can you be a great entrepreneur if you hate negotiate? Well, he goes on to say something else. He says, but I can paint a picture of excitement because that's what I feel. And I'm good at sharing that excitement for where this industry is going and talking with a company about how we might be able to work with them. Now, on our continuum, which kind of negotiating do you suppose Mr. Gates hates? My guess is that it's the conflicting element of bargaining, which most people do not enjoy. On the other hand, at which does he excel? Which does he build his business based on? It's really the deal making and relationship building side of negotiation. So maybe we should see what we can learn from Bill. If you're watching this webinar, not on a Mac, but on a PC, there's a pretty good chance that on the keyboard, you're looking at a couple of decals. One of which says Windows and the other says Intel inside. Now, those two decals on the same keyboard are really the product of a negotiation. This is the story. When Gates was first trying to develop a more powerful and user-friendly operating system, The problem is that he's limited by the capability of the chips, the microprocessors, which are changing all the time. So he goes to Andy Grove, who was the head of Intel. He just passed away about a month ago. And but this is 20 some odd years ago, and Andy Grove's the head of Intel, and so Gates says to him, look, you guys are in a competitive marketplace, and so are we. But if you could give us a heads up on where you're going with your new chip design, we could then develop our software to work better with the capabilities of your microprocessors. Same thing on your end. If you knew the direction we're going with your operating system, or if you knew the direction that we're going with our operating system, you could design your chips to work better with our latest releases. So here you have these two companies, Windows on one side over here, which is in two different industries. A software company, Intel is a hardware company making the microprocessors, but they came up with this unique alliance called Intel. Now the rest was history. Did these guys create added value for their companies? And for the, in fact, and for the whole industry to the tune of not tens, but hundreds of billions of dollars. You wish you'd put Intel or Microsoft stock back then. But this is what entrepreneurs do. They look at the situation in a broader way to come up with innovative solutions, putting into practice something Einstein said, which is that no problem can be solved at the same level of consciousness that created it. Now, here's my question. Can we apply this concept of creative deal making to the negotiation between me and Big Louie? Now, if my goal, my sole drive in this negotiation was to get a higher margin, and his was just to get a lower cost, and all we were doing was bargaining, one of us was going to win and one was bound to lose. And I think we saw which was which. But the question is this: could we have bumped the negotiation up a level and made a more creative deal? From my own experience, and I've done a lot of work with software companies, the answer is almost for sure. On most projects, there's potential synergies if people know where to look. And the tool for finding these mutual gain trade-offs is something that I call value mapping, where we shift our mental model to say there's a lot more to this negotiation than price alone. And then you work together. You collaborate with the other side to map out the other values of the deal where we can create new value by looking at the scope of the job, the schedule, the terms, the specification, on and on. For example, maybe in our situation, we can use my resources in a different way to help him solve other problems that he didn't even think to put in his RFP. Or perhaps we have a functionality that he needs, but finishes the job in 10 months rather than 12, and at the same time saves me money, so I increase my margin at the same time. Now, from my experience, and I've worked with hundreds of companies across the entire spectrum of industry, this is the direction companies are trying to go in today's economy, towards making more creative deals that bring greater value to both sides. And what's standing in their way? Bill Anton. Oh, no, Bill, say anything. So, no, wait a second. Oh, I say, no, Bill Anton provides an explanation of why people find it so hard to make creative deals like this with his idea of mental models. Namely, and this is the crux of the matter, that it's hard to think creatively when you're under the kind of stress that I felt when I was negotiating with Big Louie, who was bringing the heat. He was putting all kinds of pressure on me. Because what happens then is that the stress of negotiating excites a part of your brain that will simply not let you use the creative part of your mind. Now, the question is, how do you access the creativity that we all have, which is compromised, especially when we negotiate? Now, let me answer that question with a question. How often have you finished a negotiation and almost as soon as you walked out of the room, you said, oh, I forgot to do this? You realize what you could have done to come out in that deal. Anyone out there? Well, we don't have to run another poll because who hasn't? So what's the lesson? The lesson is, don't wait till it's over to walk out. Take frequent timeouts during the negotiation itself. Otherwise, your automatic system will lead you into a dead end. The only way you can be creative is by using your reflective system. And part of that is recognizing what's holding us back from negotiating in the first place, which is generally start. It's part of our culture. I mean, if a guy like Bill Gates says, I hate to negotiate, what's the odds that most of us, or most of the rest of us rather, are going to get our kicks from negotiating? And this reluctance we have to negotiate makes perfect sense when you consider the culture. After all, our whole lives are geared toward getting along with people. And negotiating differences is a contradiction to all that. So it's small wonder we develop that outlook. Now, the one encouraging point of I hate to negotiate is that you don't have to be any more a slave to your mental model than Bill Gates was to his. He may have hated it, but he eventually did become a negotiator, and a great negotiator, judging by the kinds of deals that he made. Now, we're going to spend a good deal of the subsequent webinars in this 5-part series talking about what it takes to really be a negotiator. We started to define what it means in this fairly short session today. And in subsequent sessions, we'll be adding that definition. Now, it's doable, but I don't want to be leading anyone down a garden path. It's not necessarily easy. I mean, if it were easy, everybody would be doing it already. So people ask me, if I can't become a negotiator overnight, then how should I handle myself during my next negotiation? Well, what have we said? Since your automatic system, based on your current mental model, may well lead you astray, then don't respond automatically, which means you have to slow the process way down. You got to spend a lot of time on preparation. What you get out of a negotiation is going to, to a large extent, be a function of the time you prepare going into the negotiation. So again, you got to spend a lot of time on preparation, and then during the negotiation, for Pete's sakes, don't shoot from the head. Think things over before you respond. Don't be afraid to take plenty of time out to give yourself time to think. And it's what you then do with that time, which will be the subject of the following group of webinars.
All right, folks. So that sort of concludes the sort of meat and potatoes of our webinar here. But we would open it up to some questions here. Let's see. We've got a couple of questions asking for us to speak up. But besides that, if you have a particular question about negotiation, we have about 10 minutes left. Feel free to text your question now, and we'd be happy to field that and try and give you a quick answer. So if anybody has any questions, now would be the time to text them in here. So I'm watching for them, and we'll give a couple of seconds for that. You think about things. We'll wrap up here in just a second. Yeah, you use the chat where you say write a message. Okay, do you take the same approach with services negotiations as opposed to negotiating a product price? So Frank, you want to talk about that, the difference in a service negotiation and how that would differ from taking a standard negotiation for price?
Yeah, I think the general process is going to be pretty much the same. The only difference with a service is that it's much less tangible, and so a bigger part of it is the subjective value that you bring into the negotiation. We're going to talk more about subjective value in subsequent sessions, but what it really says is this: is that the narrative that you tell to explain what your service is a much more important feature of the overall negotiation. But in terms of the dynamic that we were talking about, these mental models and so forth, there's not a great difference between negotiating for a product or negotiating for a service.
But I would add to that if the service contract is a negotiation of a contract that's already in play, then you have to look at the continuum, and we'll be talking about that going forward. You may in fact be in a relationship, meaning that there are multiple negotiations going on during a service contract. So that can change the negotiation. As you enter a service contract, it's not that different from a product service. But once you're in it, as changes arise or a typical change order in a construction contract, that then becomes sort of the entry level into relationship negotiation, which we'll be discussing in the later seminars. All right, let's see. We got a couple of other questions here. We've got a question from Alejandro Gonzalez, which is, what would be the best approach during a negotiation to keep your price up? Right?
Oh, to keep the price up. Aha, to not collapse like I did. Yeah, so we could really do even though this was a made up scenario between Big Louie and I, and and the whole negotiation took about 60 seconds. Even so, we could analyze all the different things that I did wrong, and you can see which caused my price to crash. So the first thing, of course, is that you want to deflect the discussion from price. In fact, you want to shift it from price to talking about value. You want to, I should have done a lot more probing to find out what he needed, and then to suit the narrative that I had, my assets, my strong points, with his with the needs that he had. And then when I gave in, of course, is that rather than making this large, as I said, rather than making a large concession, make some sort of a small concession, ask him then to do something back for me at the same time. What you're really trying to do is to give more credibility to your opening price. And you do it both by the way you make your concessions and also the way you explain what your overall product service package is.
Yeah, and I'll just refer you to the first two things on the screen right now, which is don't respond automatically and slow down. So one of the main things you can do is just slow the thing down and go, yeah, pretty good. I don't know. I'm not sure I can. So just the use of time can also help you keep your price up in that sort of situation. Okay, sometimes I'm shy to ask for more. Okay, let's put this. This is Adrian Sanchez. Sometimes I'm shy to ask for more. I'm not sure why. When they say that if they give me any more, they won't have much profit, should I assume that that's not true for the most part?
Well, I think again, it depends where you are on the continuum, the nature of the relationship that you have with the other side. If it's somebody that you've dealt with for a long time, you probably have a better feel for what the situation is. On the other hand, the question is, where are you in a kind of a pure bargaining mode, with prototypical kind of situation? And it's usually when you're in a wide open market where you don't have a long history with the other person. And one of the ways of deflecting people from asking for more is a kind of a shock. Oh my gosh, you're asking for that. And it puts us back on our heels because most of us don't want to be looked at as overstepping our bounds or being piggy or something like that. Now, people ask me, well, how do I get over that? I mean, after all, to be a good negotiator, on the one hand, you're saying you should be assertive. On the other hand, you're talking about, I have this mental model that makes me feel bad, and people tend to go with what their feelings are. And my answer to that is that when you're in a negotiation, you are playing a game. Now, it's a game that has stakes to it, and there's different games. There's a bargaining game, there's a deal-making game, and there's a relation game. In the bargaining side of negotiation, you are fully entitled to ask for a lot. It's just the way the game is played, and there's gamesmanship tactics that come into play, which people are somewhat times reluctant to use. And I relate that to playing poker. I mean, after all, if you're a great bluffer, it doesn't mean that you're a liar in real life. It just means that's the way you play that game. And the game of negotiation at the outset is to see what the limits are. And the only way you can test the limits is by asking for things, not being afraid to ask.
Okay, so let's see. This is a good question. What do you do if you find out you're not negotiating with the actual decision maker, Frank?
I don't know, Jim. Jim, what do you have to say?
Well, I typically, I mean, this goes back to the last question a little bit, which is people say they don't have much profit. I mean, I think what Frank is saying is the other side is negotiating as well. Everybody's trying to hold to their target. And tactically, a lot of times people arm themselves with the position that it's not up to me, I can't make the decision, other people in the organization are. So I would say that if you find out you're not with the decision maker, then one of your tactics is, how can I help you explain my position to the decision maker so that that decision maker will understand the reason that I have to get a higher price, because it's actually giving you more than you think you're getting or than my competition is getting. So one of the things that you often have to do is with the other person, you have to help the other person negotiate with the people above them in order to get an outcome that's more satisfactory for you. The other thing is there's other people in your organization as well. So there may be people above you that can help get to the decision maker. And that's one of the things you can look at in your preparation, is that if you get into a negotiation, you find that you're not with the decision maker, then I think you have to decide, do I continue negotiating here, or do I need to take a time out, come back later, give some thought to how do I get to the decision maker? Can I get to them? And is this person willing to help me with the decision maker, or do I have to somehow try to move up a level?
Yeah, and I think, I think that's something that you're entitled, again, it's something you're entitled to ask about, which is to try to establish what the other person's authority limits are at a fairly early stage of the negotiation, and in a polite way to say, look, especially when you are talking about making some kind of a move, maybe some kind of offering a concession, something like that, to say, look, if I give you this, are you prepared to close the deal, or do you have the authority to come to a decision on this thing? And at least try to suss that out a little bit up front.
Okay, well, I think we have time for one more question here before we wrap up, and this is a good one. How do you support securing a higher price for equal service through negotiations?
Say the question.
So I mean, I'm interpreting Corey's question as, how do you support securing a higher, in other words, you're basically raising your price point for the same services you've given in the past. How do you support that?
This is a really tough one, which is it's the issue of raising your prices. It's what most salespeople hate to do more than anything, which is going into a good account and say, well, now that you've been giving us this business and we've had a really good relationship, as a reward, you're getting a price increase. And there is no easy answer to that. There are a few things that you can do. First of all, what I find is important is giving plenty of forewarning. If you do it as a shock, it's like, or you do it as a surprise, it's like treating them to a cold bath. So let them know ahead of time that price, could start out there, so we're talking about raising our price. I just want you to let you know about this. And then you've got to have a good reason for why the price is going up. And all the other thing is that if you can tie in any kind of improvement to your package, to the service that you're offering at the same time. So you say, look, the prices are going up, but we're giving you, in your case, working for an LTL carrier, that we're going to be able to give you, I don't know, better transit time at the same time, or we can, we're going to look at reducing some accessorial charges, perhaps if they don't have a lot of, or something like that. But some kind, if you can tie the increase into some kind of either increase of service or a concession in a minor area someplace else, it takes at least some of the sting out of it. But the main thing is to give them warning that the price increase will be coming.
Yeah, and service is not like buying copper on the Chicago Mercantile Exchange. The services are never things that really can be commoditized. The quality of a service is always subjective and specific to the institution that's offering it and the people that are actually executing the services. So I would say that gives you a lot of latitude in the way you would form a narrative for raising the price on a particular service, because frankly you would be offering more than the competition and it would cost you more to do so, and therefore would be justified. All right, folks, well, that's an hour. This was great. We had a really large group. We're really happy to have had you. We would love for you to go to our website and sign up for our follow-up materials and our newsletter. You can like us on Facebook. You can follow us on Twitter. I'm getting a note here at www.facebook.com/Mobus Inc. And then www.linkedin.com/company/Mobus-Inc. And then on Twitter at Mobus Negotiator. So we would really love to have you get our follow-up material and go to our website to look for the titles of our remaining 4 seminars in this series.